I think, as you mentioned, after the 30th extraordinary session of African heads of state, they added 3 critical elements.
Right.
One is Africa common market, free movement of people, free residence. Number 2 is, which is very big, is a free common market,
right.
Common free area. Then finally, the idea that Africa will have a common air traffic market again. These are especially very big things in the context of the reform.
Right.
And you're asking, how did I receive this? I think I received this this news extremely important, especially that you remember when the AU met here in Kigali, they also issued the African Pan-African passport.
Right.
And now we are talking about self-financing, then making the AU more effective and more efficient. So I think these other 3 elements, although some see this as something big, I think they fit within the whole reform process, and especially that bearing in mind past reforms. I would say that the past reforms mostly focused on what I would call the hard end of integration politics.
Gotcha.
The first reform came with liberation struggles and fighting imperialists. The second one, after the third, what is so-called third wave of democratization, it mainly focused on democracy, human rights, and African leaders treating their fellow citizens well.
Right.
Now, this new reform and the 3 elements we're talking about, I would say these are at the softer end of African integration.
Right, practicality, right.
This is where I even think that this reform has a higher chance of being implemented, because it is unlikely to annoy some of Africa's big men. Yes.
I hear you loud and clear. Now, let's talk about some of the things that have been implemented in Rwanda, because we know after the endorsement, the Continental Free Trade Area should push through by March 2018 here. We had the Kigali Amendment Protocol, and this was in regards to conservation, and we've seen this also picked up within the AU reforms. But the reason why it went through quickly, and we've argued about this, is because we saw the entire globe rally around the conversation on climate. But when it's an African conversation and an AU conversation, we don't see the same support globally. So we're questioning March 2018 and most of these targets, and I'd need to hear your response.
March 2018, that is when African heads of state will meet here to sign the protocol, to sign the protocol that will allow African states to enforce this free trade area.
Right.
I think you may want to think that the deadline is very close, especially other things in the pipeline. But if you look at how Africa has performed for the last more than 50 years since the formation of OAU, that later on was transformed in 2002 into AU, the missing critical ingredients were 3. Number 1, most of what Africa didn't achieve had to do with political will. Even the Kagame reform team mentioned this to heads of state, that whatever we are saying, unless you put in your political will, we can't achieve anything. And the heads of state are saying this time that they are ready. Number 2, it has to do with this dysfunctional bureaucratic management of AU organs, the Secretariat, the Commission, and different organs of the AU. And now that is also is being reformed. And finally, if you look at the past, how reforms have come about, they have not been a consequence of thorough analysis of why past reforms were never implemented. This time around, it has this team that was put together to make recommendations, did an analysis, and in fact informed the heads of state that the African Union has adopted over 1,500 resolutions. It has never been implemented, and they said why. So I think you may you might say that the deadline is nearer, but if you look at why this reform and how it was accepted, the challenges of the past are addressed head on. I'm not saying it is easy. I'm only saying that the heads of state this time around are aware, and if we put into perspective, if we put into consideration that this time around, they are addressing the development part of integration, not the political end, because the political end of integration is one that I think is more cumbersome. Right. That because it touches on many elements of governance.
Very uncomfortable governance elements. Right.
So I think with this free trade area, I'm not saying it is easy because they are
but it's workable.
It is workable.
Right. So you've mentioned an issue which is very crucial to my next point, disorganization within the AU. And there was one particular question. Is the AU worth financing yet? It's still not proven that the structures can actually take us to the next level. Is the AU worth your financing?
Is it worth? I think it should have happened yesterday.
Right.
Because even at an individual level, if you can't pay for your own bills, then you can't have your own agenda. Right. Then you can't be free. Then you can't be independent.
If you can't pay your bills, you can't ask for money for other bills.
Right. So one of the reasons I believe Africa is still considered backward, and one of the reasons it doesn't have a voice on the global stage, it is because it is partly funded by outsiders. Right. And once Africans start funding AU, if that really happens, three things I think will happen. Number one, Africans will start asking questions. Where is our money going? How are you spending it? Right. When money is coming from elsewhere, you don't have the interest to ask because you're not spending on it. Number two, it will mean that whatever Africa will have a voice because you will be respected. And finally, Africans will speak with a dignified one voice because at least the outsiders who are funding Africa will realize that Africa now is able to take charge of its own affairs. Right. So I think this funding, than anything else, if you asked me, what is the most critical thing that this AU should focus on? It is self-financing. And this is where we shall also know and measure the spirit of Pan-Africanism. Gotcha. The Bible says we shall know them by the fruits they bear. Right. And all African leaders claim to be Pan-Africanists. Right. This time around, it will be easy to know who has paid and who has not paid. I'm even advising, I have before I came here, I was writing an article that if you want this to work, the self-financing to work, bring in the media. Make the media interested so that they can say, so and so this country has paid. Right. This country hasn't paid. Like a reward system.
Accountability.
Then the Pan-African movement can also come in and start asking questions. Right. Because the spirit of Pan-Africanism can, in this century, the 21st century, will be measured not by how many nations are liberated. We have achieved political liberation. Now we want economic liberation. Right. That cannot come when we are not able to pay our bills.